Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. Hope everyone's doing good. Um, it is 9:47 here at Film Fanatic headquarters. It's a Friday, beautiful sunny day. It's supposed to be in the 70s and 80s today, so that's pretty sweet. So I hope everyone's doing good. Today's a very special day. Today is Friday the 13th. So yeah, I just wanted to do a quick show on celebration of, well, a franchise, the Friday 13th franchise, which is my all-time favorite horror movie series, franchise, if you will, of all time. I've done multiple shows on Friday the 13th. I had a friend reach out to me yesterday, which was pretty funny, asking if I was going to watch any Friday the 13th movies, or what was I going to do in light of today being the day. And I'm going to be away all day today and into the night, so I probably might not have a chance to really sit down and watch a movie, unfortunately, tonight. But maybe I will, but we'll see. But but I wanted to do a quick video, just talking, about the franchise again, and it was for me the first horror franchise that really got me really into the slasher genre. The slasher genre is my all-time favorite genre of all time. The world of exploitation is my favorite, and the slasher genre is like, a subgenre of that amazing world. And I always think about movies that kind of introduced me to this whole world. And as a kid, I always think about the first time when I was probably 8 or 9 years old, really. I saw the original Friday the 13th on television, directed by Sean Cunningham, of course, who's created this whole universe. And it's the whole, as far as newer movies, as a kid I remember all of the movies coming out almost every year, and the anticipation for a new Friday the 13th movie, and as it stands now, the franchise has been kind of dead for a long time. There hasn't been a new movie in a very long time, almost 20 years. I think I could be off, give or take a year or two, but the last Friday the 13th movie in the franchise, didn't come out, or came out now almost 20 years ago, and which was like a reboot, which is actually a really awesome movie. I think it's really, actually an awesome movie, and they did such a great job kind of revitalizing the whole kind of mythology and the whole world. I remember seeing that movie when it came out, and I really, really liked it, and over time it's grown on me a lot. And technically, that movie, the last Friday the 13th movie, really was like a reboot, if you will. The Friday the 13th series has been marred down with all kinds of lawsuits, and things, I guess, have been settled as far as who owns the rights of the film and the franchise, if you will. But there's going to be, I guess, a TV series that's coming out, which I'm not very excited about, but that's coming out. There still has not been any talk of a new movie. I don't think that might, if it does happen, it won't be for a long time, unfortunately. But anyway, I look at that last movie as being kind of the last one. It's separate, obviously, from the original, franchise. But I thought they did a great job, and I think, in some ways, they kind of went out with a bang. But getting back to the original series, the first movie I saw was the original Friday the 13th. And that movie is so different than a lot of the other films in the franchise because I feel like that movie, it's definitely 100% a slasher film. But I don't know that every time I watch that movie and I go back to see that movie, that's always one of my favorites. But that one definitely, I think it's kind of a standalone movie. You know, it really established, Jason Voorhees, the main character, the main killer, Camp Crystal Lake. It, really established kind of the mythology and the origins of, essentially this kid who is picked on and who is ridiculed by his peers, and he has deformities, and he's kind of an outcast, and it's essentially a revenge tale, and ties in with the origins of his mother. His mother is the killer in the first film, and so it's essentially a revenge slasher film, but it's 100% a slasher film. It still really holds up. All the amazing kills. It was like the debut of some really great actors, as well as the whole franchise. Kevin Bacon and stuff. So but I remember, I feel like when I first saw that movie, it really scared the shit out of me. And as I've gotten older and I've rewatched that movie, I think it's one of the scariest movies in the franchise as far as the suspense level. And I feel like that movie almost plays out more like a Hitchcock kind of film than the rest of the franchise. But it was, basically the first slasher movie I ever saw as a kid. And so it, changed my life. And it also, brought in this whole new thing for me. But when I watch it now as an old fart, I see the kind of the Hitchcock influence. But originally that movie was kind of a ripoff. Came out after John Carpenter's Halloween, and essentially that was, they used that. Sean Cunningham used that as like a blueprint to create this Friday 13th, and with not, and the original was a massive success, huge movie. It was kind of a phenomenon, but it really ushered in this whole new period of the slasher genre. It really was. I mean, I've talked about that before. It wasn't, for a long time, I kind of felt that was the first slasher film that was made. But it really wasn't. There were quite a few before that. You had other films that really, really ushered in a new thing. Particularly, I think the greatest um, film that really ushered in and put together this blueprint of the slasher genre is the Canadian horror exploitation movie Black Christmas. That was the one. That was the movie. That was kind of the zeitgeist. That was the establisher. And there were slasher films that, or films that had slasher elements that came before that. I even think of Herschel Gordon Lewis's films as being, movies that really were slasher movies in a lot of ways. And of course, he was a massive engineer, and so ahead of his time when it comes to gore. So they're so like it didn't start with Friday 13th, the genre. You can trace it back and go down a rabbit hole, and it came, that genre came out before, and as well as a lot of the Italian films that came out before Friday 13th. Especially with the giallo films, where they definitely had major slasher elements before it was called a slasher thing or what have you. A lot of the same tropes. Um, but commercially, John Carpenter's Halloween really was a mega hit. But actually, or it was very extremely influential. Actually, when Halloween first came out, it wasn't incredibly successful, but over time it grew. But when Friday the 13th came out, and Sean Cunningham basically tried to copy the success of Carpenter's Halloween, that movie, when it was released, was just a major hit. And when they went into, when he created that film, after seeing lots of interviews over the years with Sean Cunningham, they didn't really have, a plan, or didn't really think that this was going to obviously, eventually explode into, probably the biggest horror franchise ever. And even by today's standards, still remains kind of the king, I think. And there's, so many great franchises out there, but I think that that's the Friday 13th franchise is my go-to. I love those movies to death, and they really were influential in my kind of my childhood development. I know that sounds funny, but and my love of horror, and so that was, and essentially it does fit the first one does fit the very definition of exploitation, because it was, ripping off Carpenter's Halloween, but it's a totally different movie in a lot of ways. It's got its own kind of vibe. It's, storyline, and but it really was, I mean, incredibly influential. I mean, there were so many, hundreds of incredible slasher films that came out in the 80s, and you know you can't deny the impact of the first movie. And as a kid, I got into that movie, and then I eventually got into, saw all the other films, and probably my favorite in the franchise is, the final chapter. Was really the emergence, of Jason Voorhees as a character, the emergence of the hockey mask, and you know basically every movie in the franchise I love. Some of the movies have really grown on me over the years that I really love. Um, Jason Goes to Hell is another one that has grown over time for me, and that's one of my favorites. A few of the other films have really grown on me that I always thought were good, but as I watch them now, I I really have fallen in love with them, and they're just amazing. And again, I can watch. I honestly don't think there's a bad movie in the franchise. I love the franchise to death, even though they do get a little bit more ridiculous as you go, especially when you get to Jason Goes to Hell. But I love that movie. I think it's an incredible movie, and it was also my introduction to practical effects, like seeing practical effects in horror, because nowadays everything, well, it's kind of going back, it's kind of going full circle. There's more and more use of practical effects that I see now in horror films and movies in general, but especially horror films, which I think is so awesome to see and to witness. So it was, on so many levels, this movie franchise really kind of changed my life, and is still my favorite. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I bought the complete collection on Blu-ray, the Friday 13th franchise, and it's absolutely incredible. I can watch pretty much the whole thing right through. I mean, it's just amazing. I can't forget Tom Savini, who was the amazing, probably the greatest and the most iconic effects man for horror, especially in the 80s. Like, there's so many incredible slasher films that came out during the 80s that he were Tom Savini did all the effects for, and so he did the effects on the first film, and then also on the final chapter. But amazing, such an iconic franchise. So I just wanted to do a quick show talking about the greatest horror franchise of all time, and its great legacy, its impact, and all things Friday 13th. So peace. We will see you next time.